Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Hey. Reminder to order your bookmarks. Reminder to find out about Shiurim if you're in town near Los Angeles or near New York in the next week. If you need any information, let us know. Okay, we're going to get started. And reminder that Zoom classes are not going to be going from Friday, this coming Friday. There will already be no Zoom until the 25th of August. Okay, Amal Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we're going to go back now to the Mishnah, and we had this situation in the Mishnah. I'll just review the whole back and forth because we're going to need it for today's daf. So we started with Rabbi Yishmael asking Rabbi Yoshua, what is the reason for Gvinot of Ovdei Kochavim? Okay, if you notice, by the way, we started with Gvinot Beit Onyaki, and then they get to Gvinot of Ovdei Kochavim in general. Okay, so cheeses of idol worshippers. To which he says, well, they produce them, right, with the rennet from the keva of the nevela, of a non-kosher animal. To which he said, I don't understand though. Nevela is permitted to benefit from. So of course we should be able to use the rennet from the keva of the nevela, and I'll prove it from the ola, which even though the ola is forbidden to benefit from, right? And yet we see that the kohen can actually drink from the liquid that's in the stomach of the animal. And even though you really can't benefit in general from an ola, but you can benefit from that, which you're going to see now is going to be the exact proof for what we're looking for about the perish, because we're going to compare between the whatever's in the stomach of the animal and what's in what comes out, the feces from the animal, because they're considered distinct parts of the animal. And that's why you could have things like the shor niskal and like the nevela, or sorry, not the nevela, the ola, the burnt offering, that are forbidden to benefit from, but yet something inside them is actually not forbidden because it's considered separate from the animal. That's what we're looking to prove, that Rav is going to prove from our Mishnah. Then he says, okay, fine, I'll give you a different answer then. It's because they make the cheese from the stomach of the idol worshiping, from animals that we use for idol worship. And then Rabbi Yishmael asked him, well, then they should be forbidden to benefit also. And it's not forbidden to benefit from the cheese. You just can't eat it. To which he answers, no answer. Okay, he has no answer and he switches the topic to the kitovim dodecha miyayin. Okay, so we're going to go back to all of this right now. The first is Rava. Rava says, travayu tanani. So we have this distinction between the shor and iskal, which, by the way, I realized after class, I didn't say what is, right? Maybe I did say, right? The shor and iskal, actually, I think I forgot to say it in the Hebrew, but the shor and iskal is a shor that gored a person, killed a person, and is supposed to get killed. And you can't benefit from that shor. But yet the feces that comes from it, you're allowed to benefit from. And we had the Egalei Avodah Zarah, which you're not. So we had a pasuk to prove it, we had logic to prove it. Now we're going to go to, we also prove it from our Mishnah. Because it says, Mipnei shemamidim kevat nevela, that's what Rabbi Yishmael said. The Kamahadrle, and at the very bottom of Lamed Dalet. And Rabbi Yeshua Rabbi Yeshua said, it's because they put in the kevat of the nevela. And Rabbi Yishmael responded, hello kevat ola chamurami kevat nevela. You can't benefit from the ola, and yet the kohen can drink the what's in the stomach. Michlal, from here you can infer shani pershayu, the things that come out of the animals, right? Again, the same thing. The dung from the animal and the the rennet from the stomach, or it's not clear whether what exactly they're talking about here, because you're going to see that they're going to change this whole thing about cheese. Right now, we're going to say there was something they believe that was inside the stomach that was kind of separate from the stomach, because they're treating it like, right, like a separate item. Like there was something in there, the same way the Kohen could drink that, right? That there was something in there that helped process the cheese, and that basically permitted, right? That was permitted. Now, when Rabbi Yoshua in the end responds, oh no, forget that. It's from idol worshiping animals. And then what's the response of Rabbi Yishmael? He doesn't say, oh, that should be permitted. He says, you should even forbid that to benefit from then. If it's from idol worshiping, then it's even forbidden to benefit. What do you hear? And Rabbi Yoshua doesn't respond. Why doesn't Rabbi Yoshua respond? They assume that Rabbi Yoshua must agree with him, that that's a bad answer. Okay, now why Rabbi Yoshua had bad answers, we're going to try to explain that later in today's daf. But basically, he was wrong, that that's not really the reason. And therefore, he just switches the topic because he doesn't want to, we don't know, but he doesn't want to start getting into this anymore. He wants to say, I'm closing this conversation. Okay, now we'll come back to understanding better why Rabbi Yeshua does that. But the main point is he must agree with him. If he agrees with him, Michlal, where can you infer there? Avodah Zarah, asur pirshayu. That when it comes to idol worshiping animals, and you have something that comes out of it, whether it's the dung or whether it's the whatever's in the stomach that they thought was producing the cheese, then it's forbidden to benefit from. That seems clear. So you see from our Mishnah this distinction between other things like Ola, which is forbidden to benefit, versus Avodah Zarah, which is forbidden to benefit in a different way. So with that, we basically, that was all Rava's proof, how we get this all from the Mishnah. But now we're going to get back to this interaction of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yoshua did have a good retort. He could have answered the following. Mishum delay to l'isur be'enei. Well, maybe because whatever is in the stomach of the animal, right, which we call rennet, the rennet, okay, again, assuming we're going to talk about rennet, okay, but right now let's assume we're talking about rennet that they assumed was kind of separate from the animal. It's something that you found in the stomach of the animal. Mishum delete l'isur be'eni. Now, when you have cheese, you don't see the rennet, right? It's not visible in there. It's not really in there. It was just something to help the process happen. And therefore, maybe that's why it's not forbidden to benefit from, right? Things that are forbidden to benefit are things that are noticeable, okay? How do we know that this would be true? Okay, and Rabbi Yoshua could have answered this. Amoraim, Rabbanan, remember the amoraim, right? The fish stew. My time. Why didn't they forbid it bahana? There's wine in there. Well, you don't really have the wine in there because remember, the wine is there just to take out the bad smell of the fish. It's like to counterbalance it. Again, it's like the enzyme. It does some sort of process. So because it's there for that purpose, it's not really there. You don't notice it. You don't taste it. You don't anything. And yet, what did they do? Now, with amoraim, the rabbis said, it's not forbidden for benefit. You just can't eat it. So that would be a proof. It's exactly the same as the amoraim. It's not noticeable in there. It's not like there's something actually physically there even. It's even better than the amoraim. The amoraim actually has wine in there. It's just that the wine is not really noticed at all. Amre, they say no. Why is the cheese worse? And why couldn't Rabbi Yoshua answer that? And this is the famous why cheese is an issue. This is like when you come talk about cheese, they talk about this issue. Hacha kevan de ukime kamokim. Okay, which they call in halachic terms davar ha'ma'amid. Lahakim is lahamid, to make it happen. How does cheese process? Through the rennet from the animal, which means that it creates the cheese. Without it, we don't have cheese. Now, you can have amoraim without the amoraim you can have without wine. Okay, umans used to make it without wine. Okay, and right, we saw the fat, when it's very fatty in the beginning, the wine actually ruins it. So amoraim doesn't need the wine to make it amoraim. Okay, it's just helpful, it adds to it. But the cheese will not become cheese if you don't have this part from the stomach of the animal, this rennet. And therefore, it's as if it's actually physically there. And therefore, again, back to, it should be actually forbidden, bahana. And that's why in the end, this is not going to be the reason why it's forbidden, okay? Because if this is the reason it was forbidden, they would have forbade it also to benefit from. Hisio the davar acher. So now we're going to go back to this distraction that Rabbi Yoshua basically switches the topic immediately to something else. He wants closed conversation. What does this pasuk mean? Okay, it means you're beloved or more or better to me than wine, or your love, something like that. So ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar, I say something like that because we're going to see the way they translate it. Rav Dimi came from Israel Amra. He said, Amar, Amra Knesset Yisrael Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's happening here, remember we said, who's talking to who? It's the female is talking to the male. The female is the Jewish people. The male is God. Ribbono shel olam, arevim alai divrei dodecha yoter miyena shel Torah. It's more pleasing to me, the words of your rabbis, more so than the Torah. Okay, we've seen this in many different statements around the Gemara. Like, for example, we had it when they said, why did they mention this opinion first? And then they said, because that was learned from Drasha. And they always like what they learned from Drasha, it's chaviv alei, it's more beloved to them. Same idea here. Okay, your words of the rabbis are more pleasing to me than the words of the Torah itself. Okay, it's a way of really putting the rabbis in a high position. Why is that relevant here? Why does Rabbi Yoshua say that? Because Rabbi Yishmael keeps arguing back to him from Torah law. And what Rabbi Yoshua is saying is, This was an ordinance of the rabbis. The rabbis forbade this. It doesn't have to always fit with the Torah. And don't question the rabbis because the rabbis are sometimes greater than the Torah itself. So Mishna haikra deshaile. Well, now, even assuming that, why is this pasuk the pasuk he chose? Now, it's a little bit weird. Why is this pasuk? It's obvious he chose this pasuk to start questioning because we just said it has some added value because it's not just this a good way to switch the conversation, but to also point out, and kind of elbow him into, like the rabbis have it right, don't start questioning. But presumably the commentaries say maybe it could have, there's a bunch of other psukim that could have expressed this idea. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Vitema Rabbi Shimon bar Ami, some Rabbi Shimon, we're not sure which one, said the following. Miresha de Kraka Amarle. What was really interesting was the beginning of that pasuk. Okay, remember we're in Shir Shirim, the first chapter, the second pasuk. Now the beginning of this pasuk says, Yishakeni minishikot piu. Now Yishakeni is from the language of to kiss, okay, minishikot from the lips of his mouth. But Amarle, what he was really saying is, Yishmael achi chashok siftotah. They use the word yishakeni, which usually means to kiss, to chashok. Chashok means to seal up. Chashok siftotah, seal up your lips. That's what he was really trying to tell him. Zo bezo, va'alti v'hel ashiv, and stop talking. Okay, I don't want you questioning me at all. Okay, which is strange, right? We always have questioning and we're always open to questions. And basically the reason why he quoted that pasuk specifically was because he wanted really to reference the beginning of the pasuk where he's basically saying, shut your mouth, okay, and stop talking. Now, why was he so crazy about this? Well, my timer, Amar Ula, v'itamer of Shmuel bar Abba, gzerah chadasha ve'em efak bekimba. This was a new ordinance the rabbis had just instituted, and you don't question rabbinic ordinances. And we're going to see you don't question them, certainly right after they're instituted. And we're going to talk about that in 2 more minutes. I'm going to keep my mouth closed right now, and we'll get to it in a minute. So now they want to know, my gzerata. What is this gzerah? What was the reason now? Because we have Rabbi Yoshua suggesting all these reasons, which in the end we're going to see he was just suggesting them, not because he really believed that that was the answer. He was just trying to get Rabbi Yishmael to stop asking questions. And he actually didn't really want to reveal to him the real answer. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, we're going to now have 6 possible answers why this is. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Mishum Nikor. What's the issue? We're worried. This goes back to the whole issue of Giloy, of leaving things open and the snake getting in and putting its venom. We're actually worried because cheese is liquidy and the snakes would eat cheese. It was one of those things that you can't leave open. There was a concern that the poison of the snake is in there, and that's the reason. To which they say, okay, now we get to the big question. If that was the reason, why didn't Rabbi Yoshua just say from the beginning? It was because of Nikor. And why did he make up other answers that weren't really satisfying? But he was obviously making up answers. What was he doing that? For what reason? Kida Ula, the Amar Ula, as Ula says, we just quoted Ula as saying, now we have a bit of an extended version of this. Ula explained when he got to Babylonia, because he was one of those people that brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia, he said, in Israel, when we make a gzera, lo megalutama atresa yarcheshata. We don't tell anyone the reason for the gezerah, for the ordinance, until 12 months elapses. Why is that? We're worried that people will not agree with the reason, and then they'll just mock it, and they won't keep it. Once we put in an ordinance for 12 months, then people get used to it, right? People are never used to new things, right? So like we all know about all sorts of gezerot chachamim, and for the most part, some people don't keep them, most people keep them, or whatever. People who keep them, people who don't, but the people who keep them, it's because they were born into it, right? You're just used to it. But if someone came tomorrow and said, listen, something you've been doing all your life, you can't do, that's pretty difficult. So we don't want anyone to start questioning. So we don't want to tell them the reason. If we tell them the reason, they'll start saying, oh, I don't want to do this. This doesn't apply to me. It doesn't this. And they'll start making a whole hullabaloo and the gzerah will never stick. So if we want to get the gzerah to be effective, we give it 12 months. People are already used to it. They've been doing it for a year. At that point, we can tell them the real reason. So that's why Rabbi Yoshua was just throwing out explanations. Now, obviously, it's a little bit tricky because why was he giving explanations that Rabbi Yishmael could knock out? He should have just said, I'm not telling you the reason. So it's a little bit tricky, but he basically, he was trying to just avoid conversation. And that's why in the end he shut him up because, listen, We're not talking about this, okay? Not for at least 12 months. Okay, now it's not clear, by the way, that this was right in the beginning of the 12 months, but it could be we're just taking this concept and saying that's why Rabbi Yochanan didn't want to talk to Rabbi Yishmael about it, because could be it would make people mock it, even if it wasn't exactly 12 months. And so using that as an example, that sometimes it's better not to tell people the reason for the Gzera, and perhaps that's why Rabbi Yochanan wanted to end the conversation, and also not tell him the real reason. Megadif Rabbi Yirmiyah. The problem is, okay, back to our topic. So what was the issue here? Nikur, which is the snake, the venom of the snake. Megadif Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah attacks this answer to Rabbi Yochanan Levi. He says, what are you talking about? Elameata yevesha tishtere, yashan tishtere. Well, then you should permit dried cheese and you should permit aged cheese. The Amar Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina says, yavesh mutar, emini chol yabesh. Yashan mutar, emini chol yashen. Okay, we have hard cheese or old cheese will not get to that process if there's venom of the snake. Again, we're back to a chemistry lesson. The venom of the snake will prevent it from hardening, will prevent it from aging. So basically, if you have aged cheese or if you have hardened cheese, then you know that there was no venom of the snake because there's no way it would have been fully processed with the venom of the snake in it. So he rejects this answer. Answer number 2. Amar Rabbi Chanina, many different interpretations of this line. I'll keep it simple, but it could mean something else. But the assumption is that if you have cheese, and especially if cheese is porous, right, like Swiss cheese with holes in it, it's very likely that some milk dropped into there, and it could have been a milk from a non-kosher animal. And that's the concern with the cheese, that maybe there's some non-kosher milk mixed in there. There's some people think they brushed it with milk or something like that, which could have been milk from a non-kosher animal, and that's the concern. Third answer, Shmuel Amar, Mipnei Shema midimota beor kevat nevela. Now we're going to get back to the rennet. Okay, so it is rennet. Now before they thought it was some substance in the stomach. Shmuel's going to say it's not the substance in the stomach. That really is peresh, and that really would be permitted if it was from a nevela. But it's from the lining of the stomach. It's from the animal itself, from part of the animal itself that has the rennet in it. That's what processes the cheese. That's part of the animal. And because it's a non-kosher animal, it's a problem. Okay? That's what he's saying. Now, and then we get back to the whole problem of ma'amid. In other words, again, it's a problem because it actually, even though it's not really there, and maybe it would only be forbidden, but basically, it's ma'amid. It creates the cheese, and that's what makes it such a problem. Ha keva gufa sharia. So wait, according to this, it sounds like if it was something in the stomach, it wouldn't be a problem, like we talked about earlier. Umiyamar Shmuel hachi. Could Shmuel really say that? The Hatnan, in other words, they're making an inference from Shmuel's statement. Hatnan is a Mishna in Chulin that says, Kevata ove kochavim v'shal nevela harezo asuha. The keva of a Gentile's animal, the stomach, or of a nevela, which is an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, is forbidden. Okay, so basically they're going to say, how could Shmuel say this? If the Mishnah says it's forbidden. Now, it's again, he says it's from the lining of the stomach, but the stomach itself, like something in the stomach, would be permitted. But this Mishnah says it's not permitted. So how could Shmuel say that? Now, before we get to the answer, this is a parenthetical statement. The Havina Ba, they asked about something's wrong in that Mishnah. Isn't the animal of a Gentile also a nevela, because they don't do kosher shchitas, right? So that's one and the same, and it's listed as two different things. So Amar Shmuel Chad Katani Kivat Shchitat Ove Kochavim Nevela Asura. Okay, the keva of an animal that was slaughtered by an Ove Kochavim is a nevela, and it's forbidden. Okay, so it's really one case. Either which way, it seems to raise difficulty with the inference from Shmuel. Only the lining of the keva, not contents of the keva itself, would be permitted, and this says it's forbidden. Lo kashya. This isn't difficult. Turning out on the bet. Kan kodem chazara, kan la'achar chazara, u'mishnah lo zaza mimkoma. The Mishnah in Chulin was written before Rabbi Yoshua changed his mind. If you remember, what did Rabbi Yoshua say? It's because it's from the stomach of from the nevelas. That was the first thing he said. Then Rabbi Yishmael asked him, and he said, can't possibly be, because if the insides of the stomach of an ola are permitted, obviously the insides of the nevela should be permitted. And then Rabbi Yoshua changed his mind. But this Mishnah was written according to Rabbi Yoshua, the first version of Rabbi Yoshua. And the Mishnah, once they put a Mishnah there, it doesn't change. Even though the opinion might have changed, they don't erase the Mishnah. So they left in that Mishnah, but it really represents an earlier opinion that was rejected. Okay, and that's the way, it's a creative way to resolve the contradiction. It's a little, difficult. Why would the Mishnah still say that? But we saw before, right? There was Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Acharona, and the Mishnah Rishona is what we have, right? We have this kind of thing, right? Mishnah Zazim and Koma comes up numerous times in the Gemara. Here I can see in the Masoret Hashas, Yivamot Lamed, Lamed Bet, Kiddushin, Shvuot, Chulin, in 2 places. Okay, it's a thing. And Rav Melchia, Mishmei Rav Adabar Ava Amal, answer number 4. We saw this from Melchia. Because they glaze it with a layer of pig fat, okay, of lard. So because of that, their cheeses are fine. It's not an issue. He doesn't think of the rennet from the animal's stomach, but it's because they line it, they coat it with lard, and that's the problem. Rav Chistama, mipnei shamamidim ota b'chometz. Answer number 5. They soak it in vinegar, or they put it in vinegar. Part of the process that helps it go is vinegar. And, right, the preparation of the cheese, the mamidim again, that's what helps it get to curdle. And what's the problem with their vinegar? It comes from their wine. Their wine is yenesech. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar mipnei shemamidim otam b'sraf ha'orla. The sap of orla trees. They take trees that are within the first 3 years. They use the sap, and that's forbidden to benefit from. So that's why we can't have their cheeses. Okay, now, before we get back to all these topics, we're just going to go into this last one. Kiman, this last opinion about orla, according to who does it go with? We're going to see there's a machloket tanaim, and not everyone would agree that this would be a problem. Ki hai tana detanya, like the one who says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, hama'ami b'sraf ha'orla asur mipnei shu peri. Now, the sap of a tree, what's forbidden about orla? Not that the branches, for example, are not forbidden. The leaves are not forbidden. Just the fruits are forbidden. So why sap? So he says the sap from the tree is like fruits of the tree. Okay, it's considered like the fruit, and therefore, if you're ma'amid, you prepare cheese, let's say, or something, using the sap of the orla tree, it's forbidden. That's Rabbi Eliezer. But Rabbi Yoshua disagrees and doesn't think so. That's not a fruit. To which they answer, no, you can even explain the Srafa Orla answer, even according to Rabbi Yoshua, who permits, because Afilu Tema Rabbi Yoshua, Ad Kan Lo Palig Rabbi Yoshua Ale de Rabbi Eliezer, Ela Bekatva de Gavsa. He only agrees if you take the sap from the branches, from some part of the tree that's not the fruit. Aval Bekatva de Peri Modu. But he agrees if it was taken the sap from the fruits themselves have sap in them. So we can now explain that answer that they prepare the cheese using the sap from the orla tree, from the fruits of the orla tree, and then it goes according to everybody. And then it's not just one unique Tannaitic opinion. Okay. The Hainu Ditnan, and in fact, if you don't believe us, it says in the Mishnah exactly that. Amali Yeshua, Shamati Befeush, I heard explicitly, that if you use the sap from the leaves and from the roots, it's permitted. But but if you use the sap from the unripe fruits, it's forbidden. There you have it, mipneshu peri, because that's viewed as a fruit. Okay. This ends the 6 answers. Okay, we now dealt with the 6th one. There's one more comment they have here, which is Bein l'Rav Chisda, Bein l'Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. I don't know if you thought of this, but could be something you could have come up with, which is, I'm just going to remind you of the Mishnah. We're trying to explain why cheeses of the non-Jews are forbidden. We gave 6 different answers, but remember, according to the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Meir, they're forbidden even to benefit from. According to the rabbis, you can benefit from them, you just can't eat them. Now we're going to have a problem, because if you say number 5 and number 6, okay, Bein l'Rav Chisda, Bein l'Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ti taser b'hana'ah, it should be forbidden to benefit from. Because if you say it's mamidim oto b'chometz, that's yenesech, you're not allowed to benefit from either. And according to Rabbanit, and if you say, right, it's not really noticeable, but it doesn't matter, it's ma'amid, that's what helps the process. It's super important in the process. Won't become cheese without it, so that's significant, and then it should be forbidden completely. And according to Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak, mamidim oto b'srafa orla, orla is not just forbidden to eat, it's also forbidden to benefit from. So if it's the sap from the orla tree, it should be forbidden to benefit from as well. So those 2 answers are weak, okay? Because of that, the first answer also we rejected, which is, right, if you say it's from the snake and the poison, the venom of the snake, then it should have been that dried cheese and aged cheese should be permitted, and it's not. So in the end, we're kind of left with three. Now in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, they mention the Mamidim Ba'or Kevat Nevelan. That's the one we all know about the rennet. The Shulchan Aruch does point out, and by the way, this is the topic of Daf Mishalahen this week, and I highly recommend you listen. Also, if your Hebrew is good, later today, Meirav Tubakan's Shiur is going to go up also about this topic. Both of them really delving into halacha l'maaseh. Super interesting, right? What about milk? What we're going to get to milk later in today's daf. What about butter? What about cheeses? Right? What are the issues involved? The Shulchan Aruch paskins, and this is very relevant. Nowadays, most cheeses are actually not prepared from animals. They're prepared from non-animal rennet, and therefore, theoretically, it should be permitted. But the Shulchan Aruch paskins, he says explicitly, even if they're making it from non-animal rennet, it's still forbidden. Okay, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins this way, and that's what leads to I mean, again, I'm not giving you a halachic overview. Definitely, there's other people that can give you that whole halachic overview. Anyway, it's a very interesting topic. Okay, and that's why we have Beyond the Daf materials to delve into those things. Darish Rav Nachman Bereid Rav Chisda. Now, before we finish up this Mishnah and we get to the next one, Rav Nachman Darish Rav Nachman Bereid Rav Chisda about the next pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Now, if you remember, the whole way we proved that it's dodecha and not dodayich, it's the Jews talking to God, right, or the female talking to the male in Shir Hashirim, and the way the rabbis understand it as allegorical, it's because it says al ken alemot ahavucha, which is right, the alamot, young maidens will, because of that they love you, and that which is the next pasuk, which is clearly the female talking to the male. So now we're going to explain that pasuk. My dechtiv l'reach shmanecha tovim. Okay, shemen tudak shmecha al ken alemot ahavucha. Okay, so now we're going to explain this. Lema tami chacham tomeh. Now already we said this whole thing is about the rabbis. It's talking about the rabbis, that they're the dodecha. So lema tami chacham tomeh litzlochit shel pleiton. The reach shmanecha tovim, the beautiful smells of your oils. They're saying this is like the perfume, and the rabbis are like the perfume that comes from this plaitine. Migule, if you leave, right, so you have a bowl with this perfume in it. If it's open, reichan odef, the smell comes out. If it's closed, mechuseh, ein reichan odef, you can't smell anything. This is like the rabbis. If you close them up and they don't get out to the people, well, nobody appreciates them. But if you let them, right, if they reveal themselves to people and they go and they teach, I assume what they're talking about is teaching and spreading their Torah, then they have this beautiful smell. Everybody smells it. Right, their effects are on many people. The Lord Ella, in addition, there's another thing about this covering. Dvarim shemechusim mimenu mitgalim lo. Things that were, when the Talmid Chacham goes out and spreads his Torah, her Torah, things that were originally closed to them, they couldn't understand, all of a sudden become clear to them. This is like saying you learn from your students, right? And it kind of reveals all sorts of things to you. Shene'amar, now how do we get this? And now I'm going to darshan this word alamot, which really means, virgin maidens. Now we're going to understand it differently. Shene'amar, we're going to darshan it in a number of ways. Alamot ahivucha karibe alumot. Alumot are things that are not understood, right? Things that are not seen, things that are invisible almost. So things that are not seen are now revealed to them. Velod ella, the ahivucha means all of a sudden they'll become clear to you. Velod ella, shamalach hamavet oavo. Even the angel of death loves the Talmid Chacham who goes out and teaches. What does it mean the Malach HaMavet loves you? Hopefully it doesn't mean the Malach HaMavet is going to get to you. It means the Malach HaMavet will let you live. Shene'emar alamot ahivucha. How do we get from there to the Malach HaMavet? Karebe al mavet, the one in charge of death. Okay, they darshan this again. This is a creative way of reading this word. Velod ella shenochel shnei olamot. Another way of reading the word alamot, like alomot. Olamot, worlds. What are the worlds? Two worlds. We always talk about this. You get inheritance in two worlds, Echad olam hazeh v'echad olam haba, this world and the next one. Shene'amar alamot karebe olamot. So we now read the word alamot in three different ways to learn three different things about Talmidei Chachamim that go out and teach. All these positive things happen to them. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. Elu dvarim shel avdei kochavim. And by the way, again, that's strengthening the power of the rabbis, which was very important in the sugya, because we're talking all about ordinances that the rabbis instituted, and they're trying to kind of solidify their place and show how important that is. Elu dvarim shel avdei kochavim asurim ve'ein isuran isuran. As opposed to the previous Mishnah, where we listed all these things that are forbidden also to eat and also to benefit from, although there was a machloket about a whole bunch, and the rabbis actually didn't forbid them all for benefit, but Rabbi Meir did. In this Mishnah, everything is in agreement. All these items are in agreement that they're forbidden, but permitted to benefit from. So just you can't eat them. Chalav shechalavo ovei kochavim ve'ein Yisrael ro'ehu. This is milk that was milked by a non-Jew, and right, no Jew is watching. The Jew is watching. The Jew can make sure that there's no non-kosher milk mixed in. But if not, we have to be worried, and we'll talk about that in the Gemara. Hapat v'hashemen shalahen, bread and their oil. Okay, Rebbi ubeitino hitziru hashemen, but immediately the Mishnah tells us that at some point they have forbade the oil, but the oil became permitted. Okay, it was like they had gone too far. It was something that people couldn't handle, so they permitted the oil, but not the bread. We're going to get back to the bread today. Hashlakot, which are things they cooked. Ukvashim, it's pickled items that they often put wine or vinegar in them to pickle them. Right, the Shlakot, cooked items, this is bishul akum. We're going to get to that whole topic soon, not today. Talit trufa, which are chopped up fish, where there's, okay, we're going to get to all of these later in the next few days, about like chopped up fish that you could have maybe some non-kosher fish mixed in there, right? Fish is always easy to identify with the fins or scales. But if it's chopped up and there's a mixture of a whole bunch of fish, you have to be concerned that something else is mixed in, even if they say it's mainly this. Fish brine, which also you can't identify where it's from, but if it doesn't have this kilbeat, which is some little fish they would put on the top, which would identify it as this has kilbeat, which is kosher fish, this is made from kilbeat. If it doesn't have the kilbeat on the top, then we have no idea which fish it was made from. You can't use it. Chilik, which we talked about, this is small fish that's kosher, but they used to catch it with a lot of other small fish, and sometimes they would be, they wouldn't distinguish between those or those. Koret shel chiltit. This is a slice of some very sharp item, which they're worried this is a different issue of kashrus. When they slice it with the knife, the flavor, right, the sharpness brings out the flavor of whatever's not kosher in the knife. Melach sal kondit, a particular type of salt. I'm going to get to that on Daf Lamed Tet, what this is. So now they repeat what they said in the beginning of the Mishnah. Why they repeat a good question. I think the Gemara is going to get to why, but anyway, they repeat the same thing. These are forbidden to eat, but not to benefit from. So we're going to deal today with chalav and with the pat, the bread. Chalav l'mayni chushla. What are we worried about with milk? Imishu mechlufe, right? Obviously, what are we worried about? That they're going to use, right, pig's milk or something. If you're worried they're going to switch it, they're going to say, oh, this is cow's milk, and it turns out it was pig's milk. Well, tahor chivel tamei yarok. We can easily identify that. Kosher milk is white and non-kosher milk is green. Okay, they don't mean green. Okay, no milk is green. Green, and we're going to get to this in Nida. They're also going to talk about green blood. There's no such thing as green blood or discharge, green discharge. What they really mean is yellow. Okay, yellow has a bit of green in it. So it means greenish, which really just means yellow. Okay, it's yellower. It's not as white as pure white. It's pure white, and then there's yellower white, or like a beige, I guess you could say. So we can identify, and we know the difference between the milks. If you're worried they're mixing a little bit of the pig's milk in with your milk, and then you won't notice it, right, in with the kosher milk, nikum, we could try to figure out, right, try to turn it into cheese. Ta'amar chalav tahor omed, chalav tameh eno omed. Okay, so now they're going to say, if you try to turn it into cheese, we know that cow's milk, for example, can curdle and become cheese, but you can't curdle pig's milk. So that should be a way to figure it out. Now, gvina hachinami. Gvina hachinami. So yeah, if you actually want to turn it into cheese, then fine, then you'll be able to know. But but maybe they're talking about where they wanted it for the kuta chabavli. That's what most people say. The chamke is, it's kuta chabavli, where they just put the milk in straight. They didn't turn it into cheese. They didn't try to curdle it. So then you won't be able to test it. Well, what do you mean you won't? Why don't you just take a little bit out, test it, see if it curdles. You'll know if it's kosher or not. Well, it's not really a good test because sometimes there's kosher milk that doesn't curdle. And if you take a little bit out, it might not curdle, but that's not really a sign whether it's kosher or not kosher. It's not a good test. Second reason why that wouldn't work. Ika de kabene itve. Even if it does curdle, sometimes you might have some other milk that mixed in. This sounds like one of the interpretations of there's no way there won't be some tziczuche chalav, some other milk might have dropped into it, and you wouldn't notice it. It would still curdle because of the majority of it, and you still might have to worry that there'll be some drops of non-kosher milk in there. So for that reason, they basically don't allow the milk. Now, milk, right, there's a whole debate nowadays, chalav akum, right, chalav nochri, chalav Yisrael, and right, this is where it comes from. And the reason why people permitted milk that's cooked, that's prepared by non-Jews in nowadays is because there's regulations and there's rules, and therefore there's no way that anything would get in there, and that changes the whole picture here. Okay, if that's really the issue, which seems clear that's the issue, so then there's ways to around that. Okay, not everybody holds by that, but that's a big debate, and again, you can listen to it in the extra shiur. Hapat. Now we get to bread. This is an interesting topic. We're not going to go into because we're not doing an in-depth shiur, but it's a super fascinating topic about different ways that you can read different lines of the Gemara, different ways you can punctuate, and different meanings of the sugya. So we're going to talk about bread. Now, bread, this is relevant if you go abroad vacation and there's no kosher bread. There's no Jewish bakery, there's no kosher bakery. Can you buy bread if you know this is not kashrus related? Okay, we're going to see this later. This whole reason why they forbade all these things. Okay, the milk obviously has something to do with kashrus, that we said, but the oil that they forbade and the bread and all that we're going to see, it's all because they didn't want, and the cooking, they didn't want us to become friends with the non-Jews and come to marry their wives and come to worship idols. Okay, it all goes back to idol worship. There's some other thing we're going to see also that will lead to something else, but we want to avoid contact in these kind of ways because it creates stronger bonds that could lead to causing us to intermarry, and worship idols. So, because of that, they forbade all these things. The question is, are there ways to permit it, assuming you know that everything's kosher and that it's cooked in separate ovens and there's nothing else not kosher? And if you can neutralize the kashrus issue, are you allowed, right? Like the famous is baguettes in France, right? They make them in special ovens and special trays, and there's only kosher ingredients in them, right? Can you do this? So Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, pat lo hutra bebeitin. Okay, remember, they said the oil, Rebbi and his beitin permitted. Here comes Rabbi Yochanan and said the bread they did not permit in the court. Now the Gemara jumps immediately on the statement and says, right, I wouldn't have to say, well, non-kosher food wasn't permitted, right? So why do they have to tell you this wasn't permitted by the court? So the Gemara assumes from here, and again, there's different ways to read this, whether it's an assumption, whether it's a question, whether it's could this possibly be, or this is a fact. Michlal, from Rabbi Yochanan's statement, you can infer, or maybe can you infer? De'ikaman deshari. It sounds like there was someone who permitted, because when someone makes a statement like this, why do they make a statement if not to say, don't think this happened, and maybe that means because people did think that, right? So it sounds like there's someone who permits. And is that true? To which the Gemara says, yes, it is. When Rav Dimi came from Israel, he told us a story. Rebbi went out into the fields, and this idol worshiper came out to him and offered him bakery-made bread that was made from a se'ah of wheat. I'm a Rebbi, come in a epatzo. He said, wow, that looks like a delicious loaf of bread. Why did the rabbis forbid this? Why did the rabbis forbid this? So the Gemara stops the story for a minute and says, Ma ra'u chachamim. Rebbi wasn't asking, why did the rabbis forbid this? He knows why the rabbis forbid it. Everybody knows that. We don't know it yet, but it's going to come up, and I already told you. Mishum chatanut. It's so that we don't intermarry. What he meant was, why did the rabbis forbid this in the fields? Because in the fields, okay, so for whatever reason they think, you can think about reasons why in the fields is not so much of a concern for chatanut. Could be, right, all sorts of reasons. It could be, you're there temporarily, you're just walking through, you're not going to necessarily hang out with people there, okay? You're busy working in the fields, whatever it might be, but why did they think to forbid this in the fields? Now, this is always dangerous when rabbis speak because people misinterpret. They thought that he was saying, why did the rabbis forbid this in the fields? It shouldn't be forbidden in the fields, and that he was saying, I don't forbid this in the fields. That's what people thought, but they were wrong. Rebbi was just saying, I wish I could eat this bread. But he wasn't saying that this is not forbidden. And that answers our question, okay, or possibly does, right? It's patloutra in the court, right? But it sounds like there was someone who, right? Is there someone who permitted? Well, yes, by mistake, though, okay? And that's a little strange. If you're going to say someone permitted, you normally would say, yeah, they permitted. There were people who permitted. But this was all a mistake. But that seems to be the answer. Again, that's why there's many different readings of this Gemara. Okay, next. Now we're going to have a second version of the story, which has certain parts that are similar, certain parts that are different. Rav Yosef Item Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Loka Amar Loka Hayam Haseh. So Rav Yosef, or maybe Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, says that's not the story. Got the details wrong. El Amru, they said Pam Achat Halach Rebbi L'Makom Achad V'Ra'a Pat Dachuk LaTalmidim. He saw the students barely had any bread. Amar Rebbi, Ein Kam Palter. Is there no baker here? Now, what did the people think he meant? Because right? They didn't have any Jewish bakers. So what they thought he meant was, do you not have a non-Jewish baker who could bake you guys food? In other words, who could bake you bread? Bread is permitted if, right, what they inferred from this was, if there's no Jewish baker, you can use a non-Jewish baker. And what he was saying is, don't you have a non-Jewish baker to bake you bread? And then if you did, you could use it. Amar Ela Pater Yisrael. Now, what he meant was, do you not have a Jewish baker? He wasn't even talking at all about non-Jewish baker. He was just saying, don't you have a baker here? Why is everybody starving? Okay, so each version basically has the people misunderstanding, thinking that there's some sort of either permitted in the fields or permitted it by a baker, if there's no Jew around, but they were all wrong. Okay, so it seems to be saying, again, there's different ways to read this, but that Rabbi Yochanan said pot is not permitted in the court, was not permitted by the court. The story seems to say, well, there were people who permitted, but it was a mistake, and it's certainly not in the court, right? And even not even out of the court. But the problem that makes this even more complicated is Amar Rabbi Chelbo. Now we continue. Afilu lamanda Amar paltero be'kochavim. Even the one who holds. Now the one who holds is mistake, right? But they seem to say there is this opinion. Somebody holds this that you could use a Gentile baker. Lo maran ela delekar pater Yisrael. It's only if there's no Jewish baker. Aval b'mkom deikar pater Yisrael lo. But if there was a Jewish baker, definitely they wouldn't have even permitted it at all. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Filu Lamand Amar Platero Ve'Kochavim Hanimili Basadeh Aval Be'ir Lo Mishum Chatan. And the one who says they allow a Gentile baker is also only in the fields and not in the city, and that comes from the first story, right? Because it was only in the fields he was trying to permit, and that kind of combines both. You need also, right? In other words, we'll allow a Gentile. By the way, the palter is a baker. Nobody thinks that you can have an individual bake you if you're friends with them. The baker just makes it more official, right? You're not exactly in a relationship with your baker, your local baker. So there seemed to be this mention of like someone who permitted, but again, this sugya is pretty clear we don't permit this. And we end with this story. He would bite and eat bread on the borders of the field. One of them said, Lo tishau v'hadeg aivu, don't even talk to aivu. Basically, they were excommunicating him. Because he eats bread of the Gentiles, major problem. Okay, stay away from him. So the sugya seems very, very clear. You can't eat bread. The big question for the real halacha lama says, people do eat bread, and that's how we started. And how did this actually come about, that people ate bread? And there's many different ways to read the sugya, and there's developments that happened over time that perhaps affected the change and why people actually do eat bread. You can try to, if you can manage it, you could try to read Tosfot. By the way, I found a really good tool that if you go into like some of the good AIs, they can translate Tosfot to you into English very easily, and all sorts of Rishonim. So if you're interested, you can do that and see if it helps you. Tosfot brings up all sorts of issues, like that it seems there were people who were doing this anyway, and once people were doing it, it wasn't widespread. Once it's not widespread, it's only Zarah, and people couldn't handle it. They needed it. We're going to talk later a little bit more about bread. It's going to come up in the next daf or two. I forget which one, but I think in two dafim. But there seem to be reasons to permit this, but this sugya definitely doesn't seem to be siding on that. But there are alternative readings that those who saw people were doing this did read the sugya with a different glasses on to try to justify the custom in their day. With that, we finished for today. We'll quickly review. We started with this proving from our Mishnah this distinction between Isur for regular things, right, from the things that come out of non-kosher animals or non-right permitted animals. Avodah Zarah, we're going to be strict and stricter than others, and we see that from our Mishnah. From there, we tried to understand better this weird interaction between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yishmael, and that really Rabbi Yoshua was trying to push him off. He just didn't want to get engaged in conversation with this, and then that's why he quoted that pasuk to say, we really value the rabbis more than the Torah, and therefore stop asking me questions on this ordinance of the rabbis, and I can't tell you because we need to let the Zarah kind of sit for a while before we can start asking what it's for. Then the Gemara brought 6 different answers, although we had issues with 3 of them, and as to why they forbade it. From there, we got off into the second category of items, which really the pod and the oil and the this and the that. We're going to get into all those things. Bishul akum, very interesting topics, and the milk of Gentiles. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.